Presence is a new film from director Steven Soderbergh and writer David Koepp. This movie centers around a family that has just moved into a new home. Things seem to be looking okay despite any, personal familial qualms that they have with each other. But the thing that they don't know is that there is a presence, a ghost in the house, and the movie is set up in a way where you are constantly watching that ghost's POV. So it's a haunted house movie, but in some kind of way it's like you, the audience, are the one haunting them in some kind of way. It's an experiment for sure on Steven Soderbergh's part. And the thing about Soderbergh is that he's had a long career. He's retired at one point and then, came back. And he's been behind a lot of great movies. But, every once in a while, he'll have one that maybe doesn't work out quite as well. I honestly feel the same way about writer David Koepp. He's written a lot of great stuff, had his name attached to some good things, but then every once in a while it's like, oh, that one didn't quite work as well. Sometimes when he's directed, it's been like, oh, Secret Window, but then, oh, he did Mordecai and the Kevin Bacon Blumhouse You Should Have Left movie. You know what I mean? But at one point he did do Stir of Echoes, so, hit or miss. Pairing these two together, it hasn't really been done before except for Kimmy, which came out a couple years ago on HBO Max. It was direct-to-streaming. Steven Soderbergh's done a couple, straight-to-streaming projects. That's one of them. It was a solid thriller from what I remember. I haven't watched it since it came out, but it had Zoe Kravitz in it. It was a pretty, solidly well-done kind of simple thriller. Because it is HBO Max, though, I'm not sure if it's still on there, because of the Zaslav of it all, you don't know what's been written off for taxes these days, but if it is still on there, I would recommend. So these two coming together with a movie that kind of just came out of nowhere. It kind of exploded at some film festival circuit where it just suddenly appeared. But these two have also, they got another movie coming out this year, Black Bag, with Cate Blanchett and Michael Fassbender. So these two seem to be, enjoying working with each other. So this is just another collaboration from them where they have seen the potential in doing this experimental way of telling a ghost story. And yeah, that is gonna be a hurdle because with a lot of ghost movies, you gotta rely on the suspense of when are they gonna strike, where could it be? But by having the limitation of, oh, well, technically the audience is always going to know where the ghost is because they are the ghost in a way, how do you generate any kind of suspense or tension? So the movie by design is not really a scary movie, because everything that's about to happen, you kind of get a sense as it goes, oh, the ghost is about to do this, right? Or whenever they do something, it's kind of a very minimal, they just move some books around, right? So how do you generate any kind of tension or investment from your audience if the scare factor is not really going to play a part? And that's through the characters. There's a really great family drama here, which I think they have written really well. They all feel very real, especially for these modern times. You have these two teenage kids, and there's not a point where I'm watching it and I'm like, oh, two old men writing for him, blah, blah, blah. It's no, these feel very, I don't know if you can ever be 100% realistic, but they get pretty close as far as how these specific kind of characteristics can be found in modern day teens, modern day people. And I think all the actors pull it off incredibly well too. Eddie Mayday, who plays Tyler, the older son in the movie, he's one of those kids who's got a lot going on as far as the extracurricular activities, sports stuff. He's got a good popularity about him at school, out in public, and he's just completely let that kind of go to his head, really realistic as far as one of these modern day just whatever passive kind of dickwad characters that you'd find in high school. His friend, West Mulholland is the actor's name. He has a couple parts to shine, a little bit more than you'd expect from a friend character. It makes sense considering what role he has to play in the movie. Won't spoil it, but there's a couple parts where they just kind of let him go, and it's man, he's really good. He's quite something to look out for. Who else is good in this movie? Kalina Leong, if I mispronounced that, I'm so sorry. She plays the main character. I would call her Chloe. She's the daughter of the family, and she is really good. While you have the familial qualms, the kind of bickering and the other drama going on with their family dynamics, you have her kind of curious about what this presence could be. She's the one who kind of clues into it first and kind of senses it first. And as I mentioned, they try to get the audience invested via the family drama, but another way they also try to put it in is wondering what could the identity of this presence be, if that even is going to play a factor or not, because Chloe seems to have maybe some kind of feeling about who this could be, related to a past person that they know, or it could be nothing, right? So a part of what's fun about just watching the ghost and who they decide to listen in on what they decide to do very briefly. You slowly kind of like start to piece together like, okay, they don't seem to mean any harm, they get upset by certain things, but how is this all going to connect? Like, what is this all going to mean? It's gonna be one of those movies for some people, especially like for me, when you see it again, you'll be able to like really see the whole picture and see like, oh, so, okay, they were kind of trying to do this the whole time, it only, comes together at the end of the movie, obviously, but when you rewatch it, it's like, it's even more interesting now because a new layer has been revealed to me before, and it still works. And speaking of, how it all comes together at the end, that ending, the last shot, this movie is kind of like a series of like these one-er kind of like tracking shots. They're kind of interrupted by like these little black screens, like when one scene ends, they'll show this and then they jump ahead, kind of like the nature of like the ghosts. Like at some point they even say like, ghosts, whenever they're here, time doesn't really work quite the same, so they kind of do their best to replicate that for the audience. So when they get to the very last kind of stretch of the movie, the very last shot that you see, there's a moment where I was kind of startled. It's truly the only like scare in the movie as far as like anything supernatural. It's really the only scare in the movie. And the way they execute it, no music, it's just something that just kind of plays out, and the image itself just speaks volumes, right? It's startling because it just kind of happens, but it also is very moving. It's a movie that, ends on quite the somber note, all things considered, but in a way that works for the characters, for the story that they were setting up. Like, there are certain things I think back on, like, okay, I see what the foreshadowing was now. Very clever, Mr. Kep and Soderbergh, whatever the input was on this. And yeah, it's going to be one of those things that I remember for a very long time. Despite any issues I have with the movie, that final shot kind of like cemented it for me. Like, nah, I did really dig this movie, and I'm going to be thinking about that. Like a lot of movies, I probably might give a higher grade to, like I really, really love. But, sometimes it's just the little things that'll stick out and just make something worthwhile, and that final stretch of the movie, that last couple minutes, it got to me in a way that it hasn't really left my mind. So I recommend the movie just based off of, that end bit alone. I really do think it's the perfect kind of like period on the film. I did have some issues with it really quickly just because of the nature of the movie, though. It is a very like simplistic kind of story. It's just elevated by some good character drama and some good performances, some good technical display as far as like not just the cinematography, but how they then work in how the ghost is interacting with their environments, in camera, real time. There's a lot of great attention to detail in that sense, and that was really cool. I will say though that there are still like just the nitpicky part of my brain is like, there's still a part of me that wants to see just a little bit more of some things. Like I wish the ghost could go here for a little bit. I know there's some kind of like intentionality to how they're not showing everything, and there are things you kind of just get the gist on, but there's just, I want to see a little bit more. I want to be more of like a fly on the wall. And then there's one specific kind of like story element involving Lucy Liu's work, something that's going on there that they kind of introduce, and I was kind of like, oh, like what is this gonna go to? And it kind of like they resolve it, and it's kind of not enough for me to really think it was worth it overall, just as far as, well, if it was just there just to get here, I think maybe there was a simpler way to do that instead of including these like other things, but whatever, you know what I mean? It's like, so those are really like my only issues with the movie. But speaking of her, Lucy Liu is also really good. There's like at least 2 key scenes that she really had to nail. One's a little more spoilery. I won't talk about that. It kind of ties into one of my biggest praises about the movie. So you'll know it when you see it, but there's another point kind of early on where she has to like hone in on like a very specific kind of like delivery and kind of like, manner as far as like how she's carrying herself in the scene, her delivery. It's really perfect though, it's kind of why, when they introduce that like work thing that I mentioned in my flaws, like I wanted to see a bit more of that, or at least just fill that in a bit more, because it's more opportunities to see her work, and I really did enjoy her in this. I think my favorite performance in this, though, despite how everyone is doing good, and I really did like watching these characters and seeing the drama unfold, Chris Sullivan as the dad, who was, in case you don't know who this is, he's Taserface, probably his biggest role, Taserface in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Man, he was really good in this, and I've seen him in a couple things, and I've always thought he was very good, especially as Taserface. But in this movie, I was just like, I was watching him and I was like, man, really taking in his performance. It's crazy that this guy, you know, hasn't done like more more dad roles, I guess. He's a really good movie dad in this. There's a tenderness to this guy that kind of like peaks, you know, near the beginning of the third act, where I was like, God, like, I'm almost being moved to tears by him. He's just so sweet, but there's also so much of him where he's just kind of like, oh God, he's exhausted. He's nervous about certain things with his family, and he's just like, it's overwhelming him, you know, and he lets that be known. And he's just so good in this. You know, I think, you know, there's a lot of great performers in this movie, a lot of great work, but I think I was just the most surprised by him, because it was like, it really was kind of like being exposed to like a new actor, even though I have seen him before. You know, he did really great work here. So overall, I really enjoyed this movie. You know, if I describe it to somebody, it might sound very simplistic, and yeah, it's an hour and 25 runtime. It goes by very quickly, very fast paced. It's a very tight story, and they do keep it as contained as possible, you know, keep it moving. So describing that, you might not, you know, you might be like, why should I go see that? Oh, because of this gimmick? Is that the only thing that makes it up? And I would say, sure, but you know what I mean? Like, yeah, the gimmick is the thing that's going to elevate it a lot, sure, but it's also what they eventually do with that to close out the movie, where you're like, oh, yeah, so that's, gotcha, you know, there's a little bit more to it. It's, you know, the kind of sneaky nature of how simple it is. It gets you with the wallop at the end, where you're like, oh, maybe I need to watch this again. I'm gonna give Presence an A-. I would have liked to have seen a couple more things as far as like the narrative, a couple other shots of just fly on the wall kind of stuff, and maybe a bit more with the Lucy-Lou stuff, but I really did enjoy what this offered me. Like I said, like, they do a lot of great work with the actors, with the character drama, and just the last, I promise you, the last couple minutes are the thing that really cements this for me, as far as like, man, I want to rewatch this again, and I'm gonna be thinking about this a lot. You know, I think these two, Soderbergh and Koepp, you know, let's see what else they want to work on together, because I'm all in. I think they crafted something sneakily great. You know, something you wouldn't expect to be this good, but for me it was. But if you've seen Presence already, leave your thoughts in the comments below what you thought of it, and as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.